Red laser dots jittered across our kitchen wall, rifles aimed at us from outside. "Step outside with your hands up." The officer's voice cracked through the bullhorn, a sharp order that shattered the calm of our morning. I stepped out barefoot in gym shorts and Crocs squinting into the Sunday. "She wouldn't show ID to the HOA president," I said, still trying to make sense of it. And then, one officer slowly lowered his weapon, narrowed his eyes at Anna, and saluted her. Saluted her. That's when I realized this was no ordinary HOA issue. It was about to get a lot worse. I'm Gavin Holbrook, 39 years old, a software consultant by trade. I spend my days solving problems no one else cares to solve and making a decent living out of it. I'm the kind of guy who likes things simple and predictable: my job, my routine, and my life. I'm married to Anna, a retired military officer, and when I say retired, I mean she could still probably take down half a neighborhood if she wanted to, but she doesn't. Anna is calm, quiet, and unnervingly good at assembling IKEA furniture with military-grade precision. She used to be tactical, now she's just the queen of our living room and the proud owner of an ever-growing collection of workout clothes. Our life was exactly the way I wanted it when we moved into Cypress Hollow, a gated suburban neighborhood about 8 months ago. The houses were perfect, the lawns always neat, and the peace was palpable, like it was made for people like us. Anna and I figured we'd settle in, make a few friends, and ride out the next few decades without causing any trouble. In our minds, Cypress Hollow was the suburban dream. But apparently that dream came with a price, and that price was the HOA. Now I know what you're thinking, HOA. How bad could it be? Oh, let me tell you. It was worse than you can imagine. In this place, the rules were stricter than airport security. No joke. They had a rule for everything from the color of the mailbox to the height of the grass. You couldn't even park your car in your own driveway without risking an investigation. The real thorn in our side, though, was Teresa Blanchard. She was the HOA president, and to call her particular would be an understatement. The woman was obsessed with order. We're talking full-on surveillance-level obsession. And it wasn't just about the rules, it was about control. She was the kind of person who would keep a spreadsheet of when everyone brought in their garbage cans. That's the level of detail we were dealing with. At first, we didn't think much of it. Sure, there was the occasional weird note, one slapped on our door, that read, "Guests must register at the gate. It's required. No exceptions." I was confused. Anna didn't exactly fit the profile of a guest, considering she lived here. But that didn't matter to Teresa. She didn't believe it. She didn't believe anyone in the neighborhood actually belonged there unless she personally approved them. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was the beginning of something far worse. It didn't take long before Anna's calm, quiet life started to get interrupted by Teresa's increasingly bizarre complaints. First, there was the issue with Anna doing yoga on the balcony at 6:03 a.m. Teresa claimed it violated noise regulations, even though it was silent yoga. Then there was the accusation that Anna had failed to register at the gate properly when she returned from a morning run despite us living there for months. Things escalated quickly from there. The worst part, it wasn't just Teresa filing complaints. A nervous neighbor confided in me that Teresa had been asking for detailed information about us. She'd even instructed them to take photos of Anna's license plate when she left for her jogs. It was like a full-on campaign against us, and I had no idea why. In a moment of frustration, we installed a security camera system to monitor what was going on, and the footage we got, well, it was unreal. Teresa had been getting dangerously close to our front door, creeping around the flower bed, measuring the tulip's height with a ruler. She was stalking us. Stalking. I don't know what made me angrier, the fact that she was invading our privacy, or the fact that she was doing it so damn systematically. Soon after, a neighbor down the street admitted that Teresa had been pressuring them for everything when Anna left for runs, what route she took, even what protein bars she bought at the store. It felt like we were being watched, recorded, and cataloged like a science experiment. Teresa had turned spying into a hobby. It got worse. Every morning there'd be a fresh, passive-aggressive pamphlet under our doormat, like some kind of personal alarm clock. The titles on these pamphlets were always about security risks, foreign nationals and community safety, undocumented residents, a homeowner's guide. It felt like she was trying to plant a seed of doubt in our neighbors' minds. But Anna, she just found it funny. "She's trying to get inside our heads," Anna would say as she tossed another pamphlet into the recycling bin. But the day that really tipped the scales, Teresa slipped a note under the door. "Your tenant was seen exiting the home without proper gate code authorization. Consider this a formal warning." Anna read it and deadpanned. "Should I wear a disguise tomorrow?" That's when I knew it was getting out of hand. If there's one thing I've learned from years of living in suburban America, it's that there's a fine line between harmless neighborhood quirks and full-on psychological warfare. And that line, we crossed it, the moment Teresa Blanchard decided our lives weren't just boring enough for her taste. No, we had to be watched. It started small enough. I thought the worst was behind us after that note about Anna's supposed unauthorized entrance. I laughed it off at first, who would take that seriously, right? But the next day a new note appeared. Violation of HOA, Section 7.3. Front porch light too bright. Please adjust to meet proper lumens. I stared at the porch light. It was a porch light, and if it was too bright, it was because we lived in the middle of nowhere with nothing but sky and trees around us. But Teresa wasn't done yet. She had a whole catalog of complaints lined up, each more ridiculous than the last. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, there was a knock on the door. Anna answered it, expecting the usual neighborly hello. Instead, it was Teresa, clipboard in hand. Your driveway doesn't comply with the new community guidelines, she said, like she was the mayor of some obscure town in a post-apocalyptic dystopia. I need to measure it. Now Anna asked, confused but calm. Teresa was relentless. It's urgent. It's about regulation 4.7. 4.7. Really, Anna shot me a look over her shoulder as if to say, is this really happening? I leaned back in my chair, trying not to laugh. You've got to be kidding me. But Teresa wasn't joking. She stood there in our doorway, clipboard raised, waiting for Anna to comply with her absurd demand. That's when I knew. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about control, and she wasn't going to stop until she had it. The next day, things got worse. Much worse. I was working from home when I saw her again creeping across our lawn, this time holding a tape measure and examining the width of our driveway with surgical precision. I watched her from the window, disbelief creeping up my spine. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what came next. Anna was in the middle of her daily jog just like any other day. She had her music blasting in her ears, lost in her own world, when Teresa appeared out of nowhere, blocking her path with that damn clipboard. You've been reported as a security risk, Teresa said, like she was reading off a script. I need you to show ID, or I'll be calling the authorities. Anna didn't move. She just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for Teresa to back off. Teresa's face turned an interesting shade of red, somewhere between fury and embarrassment. She looked around, making sure no one else was watching. You have 5 seconds to move, she barked. But Anna didn't flinch. She simply stared at her deadpan. 5 seconds, really. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control, and I knew it. I was just waiting for it to break, waiting for the exact moment when Teresa would do something stupid and everything would fall apart. And sure enough, she did. Without warning, Teresa whipped out her phone, dialing 911, as if she were the world's most paranoid community watch captain. I've got a suspicious person here refusing to identify herself, Teresa said into the phone, her voice shaking with too much drama. She's not from around here. Might be armed. Could be a threat. Please send backup. I could hear the panic in her voice, the way she was playing this up for all it was worth. But there was one problem: Anna wasn't armed. She wasn't even wearing anything that could be mistaken for a weapon. In fact, she was in hot pink running shorts and a tank top with a cartoon cat on it. Her weapon was a water bottle and house keys. Yet Teresa's call painted a completely different picture, one that had us all in serious trouble. I could already feel my pulse quickening as I rushed outside to intervene, but it was too late. Within minutes, the cavalry was on its way. The sirens grew louder, and the flashing lights started to reflect off the windows of our neighbors' homes. I stood there helpless, watching the whole thing unfold. I turned to Anna. This is insane. It's just a jogging session. She's making it look like a hostage situation. Anna barely looked up, her arms still crossed. She's trying to make us move, she said, her tone low, but matter of fact. Classic intimidation tactics. She wants us gone, but she doesn't know what she's dealing with. And that's when I knew this wasn't just an HOA problem anymore. This was something far worse. The sound of sirens grew louder, ripping through the calm suburban morning. More patrol cars rolled into Cypress Hollow, flashing lights cutting through the quiet, signaling something far more serious than a neighborhood dispute. I stood frozen on our porch, unable to comprehend what was happening. Police SWAT all rushing in like they were gearing up for a full-blown siege. I turned to Anna. She remained perfectly calm, her arms crossed, not an ounce of panic in her expression. The officers surrounded us, rifles raised, but Anna didn't flinch. I could barely breathe as the situation spiraled out of control. How did this escalate from an HOA complaint to a full SWAT response? Why was Teresa, of all people, being taken seriously by law enforcement? Step away from the suspect, one of the officers barked at me, his gun trained on Anna. I stood there paralyzed, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. This was surreal. A woman refusing to show ID to an HOA president had somehow turned into a potential hostage situation. How had we gotten here? Just then I saw the officer who had been hanging back watching the scene unfold. He squinted through his rifle scope and stared at Anna like he was trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He suddenly spoke into his radio. "Stand down. Repeat, stand down." The tension in the air shifted like a rubber band snapping. Rifles lowered and the officers who had been ready for a standoff began to relax. The atmosphere was suddenly lighter, though I still couldn't understand what had just happened. The older officer approached Anna slowly, carefully. He removed his helmet and regarded her with a look of surprise and recognition. "Echo Spectre," he said softly. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Echo Spectre, Anna's classified military call sign. Her real identity wasn't just on some forgotten list. It was top secret. She wasn't just anyone. She was a decorated intelligence officer, known to every law enforcement agency in the country. But they didn't know that. Teresa sure didn't. Anna didn't say a word. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker in her eyes. She'd been through far worse than this, and it showed. The officer's face drained of color. He motioned to his team, and they backed off in a heartbeat. "This is Echo Spectre," he said to them, his voice filled with awe. "She's cleared Tier 1. She's a national asset." The younger officers around him exchanged confused glances, clearly processing that they had just been about to arrest a person who had actually helped dismantle terrorist organizations and save countless lives. Anna wasn't a suspect, she was a hero. The officer turned back to Anna, his voice now apologetic. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. We didn't know. Can I shake your hand?" Anna didn't speak. She simply extended her hand, and the officer, looking both relieved and awkward, shook it. The younger officers stood around them, still looking shell-shocked. It was clear that in that moment they were realizing just how far off the mark they'd been. Meanwhile, Teresa stood frozen, her phone still recording, eyes wide in disbelief. Her grip on her clipboard faltered, and for the first time I saw her truly lose control. The woman who had been so certain that she could rule over this neighborhood, the self-appointed authority who thought she could break us with rules and surveillance, was now staring at the collapse of her own petty empire. "What are you doing?" Teresa shouted, still trying to assert herself. Arrest her now." But the officers weren't interested in arresting Anna. They were more concerned with Teresa now. Two officers walked toward her, one pulling out a notepad. "Ma'am, we're going to need to ask you some questions about filing a false report and impersonating a security official." The color drained from Teresa's face faster than I could blink. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the sidewalk. She was done. The facade of power, the fake authority she had built around herself, was crumbling in slow motion. The next few hours were a blur. The chaos that had engulfed our street gradually dissipated, replaced by a thick silence. It wasn't the calm of a peaceful resolution, it was the stillness after a storm had torn through, leaving everything rearranged in its wake. Teresa's world, the fragile empire she had built on intimidation and surveillance, was coming apart faster than she could comprehend. The officers took her aside, and I could hear snippets of the conversation, questions about false reports, the illegal use of a fake security badge, harassment. By the time the federal agents showed up, it was clear that Teresa had underestimated how much damage she'd caused. I watched her face as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She looked like someone who had just realized she'd been playing a game she didn't understand. For months, she'd stalked, harassed, and bullied Anna and me with impunity, convinced that the HOA rules gave her the power to control everything. But now she was the one being questioned, the one under investigation. The federal agent who arrived wasn't interested in listening to any of Teresa's excuses. He wasn't there to play nice. His questions were direct, cold, and professional, and soon enough the scope of Teresa's operation unraveled. She had compiled detailed dossiers on nearly 50 residents, each one full of photos, schedules, and personal notes. She'd been running a surveillance operation from her own living room using a fake HOA email address to intimidate contractors, delivery drivers, and even the neighbors. She had gone far beyond the rules of the HOA and crossed into the realm of stalking. But it didn't stop there. The agents found evidence of the false police reports she had filed, the fake security badges she'd created, and even a drone that she had borrowed from her nephew to monitor people's movements. Teresa's little empire was built on lies, manipulation, and a complete disregard for the law. Now she was about to pay the price for it. By the time everything came to light, the HOA board had already convened. The board members, all of them, were scrambling to distance themselves from Teresa, afraid of the legal repercussions of her actions. The fallout was swift. Teresa was expelled from the HOA, banned from any future involvement, and the remaining board members resigned in a mass exodus. They realized that if they stayed on, the insurance company would drop their coverage and the lawsuits would begin. Teresa's downfall didn't end with her expulsion. She was charged with multiple offenses: harassment, impersonating a security officer, filing false police reports, and unauthorized use of a drone. The legal system wasn't lenient with her. She had crossed a line, and now she was going to face the consequences. Her trial came quickly, and when the judge handed down the sentence, 6 months in county jail, along with a $5,000 fine, Teresa let out a shriek that could have cracked glass. She tried to plead, tried to argue that she was just trying to protect the community, but the judge wasn't having it. The damage she had done to our neighborhood, to the lives of dozens of people, was too great. As the bailiff took her away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. This had gone far beyond petty neighborly complaints. This was a woman who had decided she could control others with fear, only to find that fear had come back to haunt her. I looked over at Anna, who stood beside me, her face as composed as ever. There was no gloating, no grand speech about how right we were and how wrong Teresa had been. But I could see it in her eyes. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served. Anna and I stayed in Cypress Hollow, and over time the neighborhood returned to normal. The HOA's grip loosened, and the remaining residents, once too afraid to speak up, found their voices again. The streets became quieter, the complaints less frequent. We'd weathered the storm, but the scars remained. As for Teresa, well, she became a cautionary tale in our neighborhood. The woman who tried to control everything and everyone, only to discover that control, when it's based on lies and manipulation, was fleeting at best. Her fall from grace was swift, but it was also deeply satisfying to watch. The neighborhood had been through a lot, but in the end, we came out stronger with one less Karen to worry about. I still find myself shaking my head sometimes, thinking about how ridiculous everything had gotten. But then I remember Anna's words, the ones she said to me after Teresa filed that ridiculous report accusing her of being a security risk. "She's trying to make us move," Anna had said, "but she doesn't know what she's dealing with." And in the end, she didn't. Thomas sat still for a long time, the journal resting on his lap, as the rain outside intensified. The words he'd just read echoed in his mind: the tin soldier. The general had placed something valuable, something irreplaceable inside a statue, a gift from the First Lady, a reminder of a life of service, and a cash reserve for a final honorable escape. The general had known. He had known what was coming, and yet he had chosen to trust Thomas, a stranger, a fellow soldier who had walked away from his own past, a man haunted by his own demons but still capable of honor. The tin soldier. Thomas stood clutching the journal in one hand and the leather pouch of jewelry in the other. Arrow was standing by the door watching him closely, waiting for the next move. His fur was damp, his coat glistening under the dim light of the storage unit. The dog's presence was like a silent anchor, always still, always steady. "I have to find it, boy," Thomas muttered to himself, though he wasn't sure if Arrow even understood. But somehow Thomas believed the dog did. They had been through too much together, seen too much to need words. Thomas's mind raced as he shifted through the piles of trash and broken items in the unit. The tin soldier had to be here, buried beneath everything else. The general's final secret was waiting for him to find it, to unlock it. His fingers ached, but he kept digging. He pulled aside more bags, ripped open old boxes, but found nothing but discarded clothes, broken lamps, and the detritus of someone else's forgotten life. Time seemed to slow, and the space around him shrank. It was just him and the boxes, now buried in the shadows of the storage unit. In the dim light, his eyes kept darting back to the piles of trash. The tin soldier had to be here. He had to find it. Flashback. The memory hit him like a rush of cold water, washing away the years. He was younger then, in his early 20s, stationed at Camp Pendleton in Southern California. The sun was always too hot, the days too long, and the nights even longer. He remembered the drill sergeants yelling orders, the sound of boots hitting the pavement in perfect unison. The Marines had been his life, his family, and at that time the world had felt simple, clear. You followed orders. You did your job. The year was 1973, and he was fresh off his tour in Vietnam. The weight of the war was still on his shoulders, but he had learned to carry it. It was the day of a memorial service for fallen comrades when he first met General Harrison Grant. The general had come to give a speech to honor those who had given their lives for their country. Thomas had been assigned to assist with the ceremony, setting up the chairs, making sure the flags were straight. He hadn't expected to meet the man, let alone to be seen by him, but the general had noticed him. He had been standing by the edge of the crowd, hands behind his back, when General Grant had approached him. "You're a Marine, aren't you?" the general had asked, his voice steady and strong. "Yes, sir," Thomas had replied, a little taken aback by the directness of the question. "I can tell. You've got the look of someone who's seen too much," the general had said, his eyes piercing as if he could see right through Thomas. "You know, I once had a soldier who was just like you. Same look. Same weight on his shoulders." Thomas had stiffened. He didn't know what to say to that. The general had been talking about someone that Thomas didn't quite understand. That soldier went on to do great things, the general had continued, pausing as though contemplating the past. But you need to know this honor is not just about what you do for your country. It's about what you do for the men who served alongside you, what you do for the ones who need you, the ones who are still alive. The words had stuck with him, following him for years. Thomas had carried them into battle, into every conflict, physical and personal, that followed. And now, standing here in the cold dampness of the storage unit, he realized that the general's words had become a part of him. He had learned to live by them, even when it felt impossible. Back in the present, Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow and pulled his thoughts back to the task at hand. The tin soldier. He scanned the unit again, but the piles of bags seemed endless. There was too much to sift through. The rain outside had turned into a downpour, the sound of it hammering against the metal walls of the unit. Arrow stood still, watching him as if he were waiting for some sign, some direction to follow. Thomas stood in the middle of the unit, his hands on his hips. He could feel the weight of the general's words pressing on him. It wasn't just about finding the treasure anymore. It was about finding the truth, the hidden history that had been left to rot in a storage unit. Thomas's fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a patch of something that didn't feel like the usual wet cardboard. His heart skipped and he moved closer, pulling away the trash bags with more urgency now. There, lying half-buried beneath a layer of old newspaper, was a small figure. The shape was unmistakable. It was a soldier, a tin soldier. Thomas knelt down, his hands shaking as he wiped away the dirt and grime. The figure was worn, the paint chipped, but it was unmistakable. A small metal soldier in a red uniform with a black hat. It was a figure he had seen before, a traditional holiday decoration. But this one was different. It was solid, metal-heavy, and sturdy, and the base was too thick. He could feel something inside it, a compartment, a secret. The general's final reserves. Thomas's heart raced. The figure felt wrong in his hands, like it wasn't meant to be held. He looked down at it for a long moment, then set it on the floor in front of him. He ran his fingers along the base, searching for any sign of a hidden latch. There it was. A small seam, barely visible to the naked eye, hidden beneath the soldier's painted gold trim. He pressed gently and the figure gave a faint click. The base popped open with a soft, metallic sound. Inside, tucked carefully into the cavity, was a small, tarnished silver box. The moment his fingers touched it, he knew it was important. The general had hidden it here for a reason. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. The silver box wasn't just a trinket, it was the culmination of everything. He opened the box slowly, revealing stacks of cash. Old worn bills, hundreds, 50s, 20s, each one aged and brittle, but still crisp enough to be worth something. He didn't need to count them. He knew exactly how much was there. $40,000. His head spun. This wasn't just treasure, it was a lifeline. A way out. The general had hidden away enough money for an escape. A final act of defiance against the world that had turned its back on him. Thomas looked down at the cash in his hands. It wasn't his money. He knew that. It was the general's, his last act of rebellion, his final legacy. But now it was in Thomas's hands. For a long moment, Thomas didn't move. His mind raced, his heart hammered. What was he supposed to do with this? The decision had been thrust upon him. He had uncovered the truth, the wealth, the story of a man who had been betrayed by his own blood. But Thomas didn't know how to face it. He could take the money, pay off his debts, take care of Sydney, or he could do something else, something honorable. Arrow, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. The dog's steady gaze met his, and for a moment Thomas felt something close to peace. He wasn't alone.